Hi there, my name is Katie Modrau. I am the country manager for our A21 South Africa office, and I'm just going to take a few moments today to talk to you about human trafficking specifically in the South African context and what A21 does here to respond to that and to to work programs around that here in our African context. But to start off, I'll just give a quick recap of what human trafficking is. So it's the exploitation of people. Basically, it is treating a person like a commodity, like something that can be bought and sold and used for the financial gain of another person. Recruiting people into human trafficking often uses fraud, force, or coercion, and the methods of exploitation or the types of exploitation that victims find themselves in very often is sex trafficking, labor trafficking, organ removal, trafficking for domestic servitude, and then other types of labor practices as well. And now in our South African context, that's no different. We see in South Africa specifically, we see a lot of sex trafficking and a lot of labor trafficking in agriculture, in fishing, and then also domestic servitude, which is labor trafficking in a private home or private residence. That is probably one of the trickiest types of human trafficking to identify, because labor exploitation or forced labor in a private residence is almost impossible to see unless you are close to the situation or unless you have an inside road to what's going on in that house. And we see a lot of that here in South Africa. Now, the reality of human trafficking in South Africa is that the prevalence is out of every 1,000 people, it's estimated that 2.8 people find themselves in human trafficking. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you break it down, if you think about how many thousands of people you come across in a week, let's say you are going to a mall, or when we are allowed to fly, you are flying, how many thousands of people do you come across every week? And the potential that 2.8 of those people, every 1,000 people, find themselves in slavery, that is a very high concentration, in my opinion. Another statistic or reality in South Africa is that the vulnerability rates or the vulnerability indicators in South Africa show us that 54% of our population are highly vulnerable to human trafficking. 54%. Now, if you think about our context in South Africa, that how many people that you come across on a daily basis that actually could be very, very vulnerable to being recruited by the organized rings that operate within our context. So in order to really understand about the issue of human trafficking or respond to it properly, you actually need to understand it in its context. What causes people to be vulnerable? Well, if you look at vulnerability, there are systemic vulnerabilities, so context, government, legislation, GDP, all of corruption in a country. There's systemic vulnerabilities, and then there are individual vulnerabilities. And we, in our context, have both. Individual vulnerabilities may be things like lower levels of education. It may be lower levels of employment. It may be no access to clean water and sanitation. It may be poverty of opportunity. So you may live in a context that doesn't allow you a lot of opportunity for employment or education or experience. So we have the systemic vulnerabilities and we have the individual vulnerabilities. And it's really, as I said, important to understand that in order to know how to respond to human trafficking in our context. So what does A21 do? Well, globally, we have a strategy of reach, rescue, and restore. We call it our three-prong approach or strategy approach to responding to human trafficking. And in South Africa, that's no different. We employ the reach, the rescue, and the restore responses. And I'm just going to take a moment to break down how we do that in South Africa and what that actually looks like here. So specifically, our threefold response, reach. We look at reaching specifically vulnerable groups with the information on what human trafficking looks like in our local context and how to either respond to it or protect themselves from it. Very, very, very strategically identified communities, strategically identified people groups in order to bring the message of what does human trafficking look like in your context? And if you were to notice it, how do I protect myself or how do I report it? So we do this in a number of ways. In South Africa specifically, we work a lot with schools. We actually have a signed MOU with the Western Cape Education Department where we make our Bodies Are Not Commodities education curriculum available to all teachers online. They have an online teaching portal, and at the click of a button, the teachers have access to all of our teaching materials and free downloadables to actually equip their students with what trafficking looks like locally. And then secondly, we also have our Can You See Me campaign. Now, you may be familiar with Can You See Me globally, and we've produced 3 local scenarios in South Africa that unpack how does trafficking happen here? What does the recruitment look like in your community? And what might a victim look like in the South African context? And we have found these videos incredibly powerful, equipping not just vulnerable groups, but everyday individuals to be able to recognize human trafficking happens on my doorstep, and I have a number to call, I have an action response if I see it happening. And so those are just 2 examples of reach that we do in the South African context. Secondly, our second approach is rescue. And now in our rescue context, what that is trying to do is there are programs and interventions with the aim of creating opportunities and increased opportunities for victims to find rescue, to find themselves rescued. Now, the global reality is that less than 1% of victims will ever be rescued. Let me just pause there. 99% of victims will stay in human trafficking or live the remainder of their life in human trafficking because the opportunities for rescue are low. And so our rescue department or our rescue strategies aim at increasing those opportunities. Now, in South Africa, I want to highlight 2 ways that we do that. Firstly is we train frontline professionals. So we target specific professionals that within their everyday, within their workplace, they may come across victims of human trafficking. And then what we do is we train them. This is what human trafficking looks like. This is how you identify a victim. This is what the South African legislation says, and how you report this, how you respond should you come across a victim within your everyday work. These professionals, for example, flight attendants, people working in airports, social workers, medical professionals. I'm trying to think of the other types of people we've trained before, teachers, anybody who in their everyday life comes across victims. And we have found that when we do the trainings, there is a massive increase in calls from that specific sector of people identifying victims as a result of the training. And then secondly, a way that we help to increase opportunity for victims to find rescue is through our hotlines. And in South Africa, we run a 24/7 national human trafficking hotline. The number is 0800 222 777. We are 4 years old, and we have seen over 20,000 calls come in from all around the countries, all 9 provinces, in the 4 years of operating this line. And what we aim to do is it's a one-stop line that anybody can call. I think I see something suspicious. I want to find out about human trafficking. I want to get training in my context. I think I am a victim and I need help. Or even we've had police call, we've had medical professionals call saying they think they've got a victim but they're not sure what is their next response. And the hotline aims to respond to every call that comes in and either connect the victim to all the services that they need or connect the caller to the next steps that they need to take in order to get themselves educated or help a victim, whatever that may be. And so in our context, our 2 responses to our rescue strategy is frontline professional training and our hotline. And then lastly, restore. Globally, globally A21 runs our restore programs, which looks at aftercare services to assist a victim to move to being a survivor, and then from a survivor to actually functioning and flourishing independently in the life that they choose. That freedom of choice and that ability to grow and to flourish. And that's what our restore programs do. In South Africa, we have trained social workers who work with victims who are placed in partner shelters at developing their individual care plans. How do I go from where I am now to where I want to be? How do I learn how to dream again and get there? And then also, we are soon to launch a Freedom Centre in South Africa, which is a one-stop drop-in centre that operates during the day, that any survivor can come in and have access to all the services that they may need. That may be medical assistance, psychological assistance, vocational training, just a supportive community to be able to assist them and surround them and support them on their journey. That's what our Freedom Centres provide, and we're so excited to start that in South Africa. And so that's a little insight into what does human trafficking in South Africa look like, and what is A21's local response to that. And you know, if you are considering partnering with A21 and getting involved, what you're actually doing is resourcing or putting the resource in our hands to be able to respond to the ever-increasing need that we see. I found in my time working in the South African context that the more we do, the more we notice the need and actually come up with very targeted strategies to reduce vulnerability and to increase opportunities for rescue. So if you consider partnering with A21, what you're actually doing is you're putting the resource in our hands to respond to that need. I often like to say that sometimes we can't see ourselves as being able to make a difference, but making a donation, becoming a funder or a partner, what you're actually doing is you're making a step that has a ripple effect in places that you may never visit and in people's lives that you may never meet, but the impact is felt and it carries on through the ripples. So thank you for your time. Thank you for taking a moment to learn about human trafficking in our context. And I hope that we can look forward to partnering with you in the future.